Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome in for the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I am your host, as usual, Liam at the FSA Tweets on Twitter. And today, I've got no Rich, as most of you will know, if you haven't already heard. Rich is no longer with 5 Yard Dynasty, but I do have one of the 5 Yard Dynasty writers to help me out end of the season. So we've got plenty of off-season stuff. Before we dive right into the off-season stuff, Paul at Paul_Picken on Twitter. As I said, 5 Yard Dynasty writer. He is also the host or a co-host of the Fantasy Wildcard podcast. Paul, let's bring you in. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. It's nice to be here. Nice to be here. You know, I'm filling Rich's shoes at the moment, and you know, big shoes to fill. But there you go.
You're not filling anyone's shoes, mate. It is all for the guest spot, and that is who you are today. You are the guest for us. So, as you're the guest, this is something we started to do last year during the off season, but I'm going to give you a little bit to talk about yourself. So, how did your season go for first? Because, as I said, end of the season. So, did you win any championships? How did things go, especially with a crazy week 17?
Yeah, it was a weird week 17, wasn't it? You know, so I had 3 championships and I won. So one was my Dynasty home league, won that one, but that was a bit of I want to say it was a victory, but I still had Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase to play, and the other guy had the Bills defense and James Cook, and it was just all a bit. I think I would have won anyway, but it was just a bit hollow. If I'm honest, it's just one of them where you're like, yeah, I've won, and I think I would have won if the game would have gone ahead. But it's one that it was just a bit weird, a bit of a weird one. I won one of Murph's playbook sign shirt leagues, so I won one of them.
Nice.
And then me and Murph actually made the final of one of the listener leagues, the Rules Mania one. Weirdly, that we both commissioned as well. So that doesn't look a bit dodgy, does it? But
yeah, it does. I came into that league halfway through the draft and had no idea what was going on for the entire season. I've played in Rules Mania before, but that one was a special, kind of crazy. That was
yeah. It was a little bit mental, but I really enjoy the Rules Mania. It just adds a different spin to it. But but yeah, so that one was predicted to be really close. So me and Murph had a chat and decided to call it a tie as such, you know, and just sort of it was just one of them. I think we were both predicted to be split by about a point, you know, and it was
very close then.
Yeah, and you know, I think he still had Joe Burrow, but with the rules, it was he didn't get points for yards, and then I had the Bills defense, but the defenses could score mega points, and it was just mental. It was all just, you know, it was one of them where you're like, with everything that's going on, we want to try and decide a winner, but even in Rules Mania, it was just like, let's just call it a tie. So, but yeah, all in all, it was a good season, mate. To be fair, it was a good season.
I mean, speaking of the listener leagues, if you don't know and you're listening to this, Murph and a couple of the other guys, I know Paul and myself, both commissioned some this year. We do listener leagues at the start of the season. They're all redraft. And you can get into the Champions of Champions League, which is 18 teams Superflex. That's also a mental league. You can do normal like Superflex, normal 1 QB redrafts, and then you can do some of the crazy ones like Rules Mania, Vampire Leagues, and stuff like that. So if you're interested, keep your eyes out come August time, because that's July, August time is when the sign-up form comes along. But enough plugs for now, at least. So How long have you been playing fantasy football? I know that you have recently got into content, but how long have you actually been playing fantasy football?
Well, playing, I think I'm on about 6 or 7 years now. But yeah, producing content has been like this year was the main one. It was all last off season and this year, and that was thanks to the help of you and Rich. You guys helped me get into that, so got you two to thank for it, But yeah, so I'm trying my best with the content,
Your content's brilliant. Don't put yourself down whatsoever. I look forward to seeing a lot more during the off season because you're on the Wildcard podcast. How's that going? The Fantasy Wildcard?
Oh, the wildcard. I'll correct you. It's the Wildcard Rewind.
Wildcard Rewind. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wicked, mate. I never thought I'd enjoy it as much as I do. I love talking. I love chatting and stuff. But actually, like me, Hannah, and Mags, we've grown like really close recently. That actually we just sit there for like easily half an hour after the show, just chatting, and it's like as if we haven't spoke enough for the last hour. We'll just continue to chat after the stream's finished, and we'll just keep chatting. And it's like, they always say you just make a little family, and we are just genuinely like a little family, all of us now. So loving it.
I have no idea how to transition that into fantasy football, but it sounds great. And that's the type of crew you want for your fantasy football podcast or any type of podcast for that matter.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back to fantasy football. Significant news quickly. There's not much to go through because it's the off season. Not much happens. So the big news is Black Monday, New Horizons Monday, if you listen to the ATL podcast. However you want to coin it, there's now 5 jobs available for head coaches. So that's the Texans, the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Broncos, and then the Colts as well, because the interim head coach there, I don't think he's coming back for next season, Jeff Saturday, but looks like you've got those 5 head coaching jobs. I wanted to circle around to the Cardinals because you're a Cardinals fan, Paul. How would you feel about the firing or mutual, whatever you want to call it? Because I know that Cliff Kingsbury won't want to call it firing. How do you feel about it, and how do you think Kyler's going to do moving forward?
I am probably the happiest man in the UK at the moment with it. It was something I've been wanting all season. I just think Cliff Kingsbury was out of his depth in a way, mate. I think he had a good strategy, but once everyone had sort of figured out his strategy, I don't think he had a plan B. He looked a bit out of his depth and stuff like that. He didn't know what to do with Kyler really, and the only time Kyler looked decent was when Kyler scrambled, like, you know what I mean? And it was all just a bit, he annoyed me, but also we've got rid of our general manager as well. He stepped down due to health reasons. So hopefully there's a big turnaround coming in the Cardinals. And I just hope that we go about it the right way. I've seen quite a few teams now, like the Lions and the Jags and stuff like that. They've gone into rebuild. They've changed things, and they've turned things around for the better. So I'm hoping we can do the same. We can do the same, but I am happy about it.
I can tell by the massive smirk on your face. So we'll dive into the next bit of significant news, and I suppose it's not really news, but it's something I did want to cover, and that is that there could be a lot of change at quarterback next year. What you see currently this year and the starting roles could look completely different. We're talking like half of the league. When I was thinking about it, going through, I know Rich put out at Dynasty Island, put out a tweet, I think it must have been last week now, about the amount of QB changes. And when I really started to think about what QB changes I could see coming, I came up with 17 teams that could have a different QB, at least at starter next year, whether that is new draft pick, whether that's trades, people coming to end of contract. Could be so many. I don't know whether when I read these names out for you and I have any that you disagree with or find surprising, but I'm thinking you've got Green Bay, Detroit, Washington, the Giants. You've got the whole NFC South could have new starting quarterbacks next year. Seattle, Los Angeles Rams, that is, the Baltimore Ravens, New England Patriots, New York Jets, Tennessee Titans, Indianapolis Colts, Houston Texans, and the Raiders. I don't see many starting roles right now, maybe 10 to 15 roles currently that are bang on certified for next year. I think there's going to be a lot of movement this offseason. We thought last offseason was going to be a lot of movement. I really think this year is going to be even more crazy. Is there any teams that jumped out to you or any that didn't quite jump out to you as much? Any that I didn't mention? That's probably a big one as well.
I think you've got all the ones that I'd say are going to struggle, but there's a couple in there that, yes, I agree that they haven't at this moment in time got a set in stone starter in place, but I think they have got their man there. Like Baltimore Ravens, I'd be shocked if they let Lamar go. You know what I mean? I understand that they need to pay him and they need to pay him big and whatnot. And I think I was reading something about haven't they paid one of their linebackers, or they've just given him they've just given him $100 million deal, like, you know, and so it's a tough one, but I think they'd be idiots if they didn't pay him.
Completely agree there. I mean, I can see them franchise tagging if they can't get the deal done. Yeah. But it's something that I wanted to highlight, that even though we all expect Lamar to be back there, crazier things have happened. And they don't currently have a quarterback under contract for next year, at least a starting quarterback.
You know, I could make an argument for others. Seattle, I think Geno Smith's done enough to get that.
Same, I agree.
You know, we'll speak about a couple of the other ones in a little bit, but what I wanted to pick your brain on is the first one you mentioned, your beloved Green Bay Packers. What's your theory behind this then? Why have you sort of, you know, are you convinced that they're looking for a new QB? Are you convinced that Aaron Rodgers is gone? What's your thought there?
I think the issue is the lack of convinced that I am about anything to do with our QB spot. I don't know whether Jordan Love is going to be the guy. I don't know whether Aaron Rodgers is coming back. If Rodgers comes back, does he even want to play for us? I think there's a lot going on right now that we don't even know, and that's why I put them on there. Rodgers has a massive cap hit next year. If he isn't with the team, if he retires or whatever, Packers take on $40 million against the cap. That's like 20% of the cap just for a player that's not going to play for them. So I think it's quite interesting to think of that scenario, but we have seen things like this happen. I mean, if you think about Brett Favre, there's been tweets going around today where Brett Favre was actually paid quite a substantial amount of money when he wasn't in Green Bay anymore, when they moved over to Aaron Rodgers. So they can do stuff. They have a first-round rookie QB on a rookie contract, so they can move forward with Jordan Love next year and it not be a horrendous situation. It's not like they have no one, but if it's not one of those two, I'd be very surprised if it isn't one of those two players. I don't think we're going to trade for another QB or sign one. I just don't see either of those happening. So the big thing about Aaron Rodgers right now is he didn't want to trade jerseys with Jameson Williams. He wanted to keep it. I don't know whether you saw that video.
I was gonna
He was
say,
taking all the sights of Lambo in. He was very sentimental, with it being his last game or potential last game at Lambo. And we haven't seen that at all from him in any other season. Like, if you think back to last year, I know that we had already secured the playoffs and we didn't play him, but he didn't, at the end of the playoff run, we didn't see him be that sentimental. So that's what's kind of worrying to me, is we've not seen him fully embrace it like it is his last season, even going into the playoffs. I know there's always been that question, but it's something that you really need to consider, and that's why sneaky drop in here. But I kind of think Jordan Love is a good buy right now. I don't think he's valued as highly. Yes, his value might go up a little bit, and people might want to hold, but if you can snag him for a third, I think that's a shot you can take.
yeah. So I'm going to ask you a different question here now. So, do you think Aaron Rodgers plays next year for any other team bar Green Bay? Do you think that maybe they trade him or something like that, or do you think that if he's not at Green Bay, that's him out of the NFL and he's retired?
I think the only way he does play on another team next year is if he is traded. I don't think we'd cut him. There's just no way that we wouldn't get anything for him.
Yeah, and with his contract, you'd want somebody to take some of that as well and stuff like that.
Potentially, yeah.
But I'm just thinking like maybe he's playing somewhere else, in Chicago, maybe.
I mean, no, he's not going to Chicago. Come on.
So he can turn up a Lambo. I own you.
There is not a chance that we would trade him to any divisional rival, even for the 101. But I just don't think that. I think it's tough because I believe he has a no trade clause in his contract. I'd have to have a look at it, but I think it's definitely tough in terms of Rodgers would play up that much of a face, even if he doesn't have a no trade clause in his contract. You wouldn't be able to trade him to somewhere he doesn't want to go. So it'd have to be mutual, and I definitely think it's on the cards, but it'd have to be before the draft, not afterwards. We kind of saw something similar last year where there was a lot of rumor going around beforehand, nothing really happened, and then there was a lot more interest after the draft. And I don't see why the Packers would even consider trading him after the draft when those draft picks. No one's going to trade a rookie draft pick right after the draft. So I think it's just interesting. But no, I personally can see it happening. I don't think it does. I think he comes back, but it's still quite worrying, especially as a Packers fan. But Paul, let's dive into the first segment. So what we're going to do is go over the top 12 quarterbacks, but the way that I've done it this year is by points per game with a minimum of 4 games under their belt, because I don't want random 2-3 game QBs coming in. And I also wanted to highlight the season finishes aren't exactly the whole story, because you've got guys like Jalen Hurts that have a different season finish to where the points per game was. So let's dive right in. And the first name is Jalen Hurts. His points per game finish was first overall. That's why we're talking about him first. But his season finish was QB3. You've got Patrick Mahomes, points per game finish as QB2, QB1 in season finish. Josh Allen, again, points per game finish 3. I'm just going to stop saying points per game finish because you can guess where they're going if I'm going down in an order. But season finish of QB2, Joe Burrow, 4 in both categories. Justin Fields, QB5 in both categories. Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, 2 that I kind of wanted to highlight because people will be viewing them as their season finishes are outside the top 12. 13 and 18 respectively, but they've both landed on IR with big injuries. So that's why points per game is quite interesting. It's not the whole story, but I find it a bit more useful than season finish. Geno Smith at QB6 season finish, QB8 points per game. Dak Prescott and QB20 finish. And this is another reason why I wanted to bring this in. Dak Prescott, QB20 season finish. Yeah, he was QB9 in points per game. Quite an interesting thing to talk about. Daniel Jones, QB7 in finish. So this worked the opposite way because he was QB10 in points per game. Tua, QB15, and then Trevor, QB8 in season finish, but ended up lower in points per game. So, Paul, I'm going to throw it to you. Pick out one of the names out of those top 12. We'll go through and we'll talk about some of them and maybe even have a look into the 23 season beyond.
Yeah, so let's start at the top, and we'll start with somebody who, for me, is one of the big shocks with Jalen Hurts. You know, I think I was amongst people that were very worried about where he'd be 12 months ago, and you know, I think a lot of people were out on him. A lot of people were like, yeah, he's a 1 year guy now. They're just gonna do whatever and then go and pick up somebody else. But actually, he's completely flipped it all around to the point where actually we can discuss about him being within that top 3 in QB, in QB rankings now. He's a massive dynasty asset, and he's got everything. He's got the rushing ability that we talk about with Lamar. He's proven that he's got the passing ability. I believe AJ Brown this year has the most receptions by any Eagles player ever. He set that record, didn't he?
He did. Yeah, he did.
You know what I mean? So he's proven he can rush. He's proven he can throw the ball. He's proven he can do it all. And you know what I mean? He's completely blown me out the water this year. I think I tell you what, I'd struggle to find somebody that was all in on Jalen Hurts going into this season that said he's a QB3 dynasty ranking QB3 for me. I think you'd struggle to find that, and he's a big shock to me. Big shock. I'm looking forward to seeing where he is in 12 months' time.
Likewise, I think that he is the biggest shock in terms of highest valued, and the value change, because you'd find people that were a bit more or a bit less concerned with his value this year, but they still had that kind of cautious take around him. I were one of these dynasty players that was quite cautious because the Eagles still have multiple first round picks that they can go trade up for a quarterback. They can do whatever they want. I think if we're talking NFL terms, this is a perfect situation for the Eagles. They basically had no real downside to Hurts playing badly. Obviously, they wouldn't have the first seed. They wouldn't be in the playoffs if Hurts played badly. But they still have multiple first-round picks that they could go and pick up a quarterback. They have 2 star wide receivers that quarterback would then come in to play with. So they didn't have a real massive downside into losing this season, whereas it was a low-risk, high-reward play of letting Hurts have a season to himself with these draft picks that they managed to get up. I mean, Hurts, as you said, my question to you was, is Hurts now a top 3 quarterback with Mahomes and Allen? And I personally think he is. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's had 4 over 300-yard games this season in his 13 games that he played. 15 games that he played. So he was only ever a QB or lower than QB 12 twice in the entire season. That's insane consistency. But when you also think that One of the weeks that he was QB or lower than QB 12 was week 18. That doesn't really matter for any fantasy football. Yes, you might have a league here and there that play in week 18, but if that's the case, I don't know what you're doing because you get players sit and whatever. But he was still QB 24, so he's still a top 24 QB. And then in week 4 was his other week. He was still QB 15. If you're telling me that someone has a floor of QB 15 in a fantasy football season, that is insane. And I know that hurts, especially if you bought him 12 months ago or 8 months ago. His value change has jumped significantly because I remember saying before the season started, Hurts, he's got such a wide variety of outcomes. He could be out of a job I said this time next year, which is in 2-3 months' time. He could also be a top dynasty QB, and we all need to realize that. And the one end of the spectrum ended up happening, but it could have easily been the other one. And as you said, he's proven that he can pass it. I think a lot of people still kind of were unsure on whether he could pass the ball as well that he did. But I mean, look at some of his stats, look at some of his throws. I remember a throw, I think it was week 5 or 6, I can't remember, where he dropped it over a defender and only in the place where Dallas Goedert could catch it. And it was incredible because it was towards the sideline. Dallas Goedert still had a defender on top of him, as well as having this defender in front that Hurts had to drop the ball in. It was literally the perfect throw, and he came down with it. And that's the sort of thing that a lot of people kind of didn't expect from Hurts because they just saw the rushing upside. And I mean, when you talk about the rushing upside, it's incredible what he's done: 760 yards, 13 touchdowns on the ground, as well as still having 3,700 yards and 22 touchdowns in the air over a 15-game span. I think that's incredible. And I definitely have him as QB3 now in my dynasty rankings.
So I'm gonna throw a question at you. So I'm gonna take last year QB3 ranked Justin Herbert, and I'm gonna say, would you do that trade straight up? Justin Herbert for Jalen Hurts. If you were the Jalen Hurts owner, would you trade that straight up?
I would not trade Hurts for Herbert.
So that's how much this like situation has changed for both players. Because last year, mid-July, you couldn't have give Jalen Hurts and a first to get Herbert. Nobody would have done it. They'd have gone, nope, don't want him, don't want that risk, I want more, you know. And now
if we think about where Herbert was last year, at the start of the season, he was QB1 in DLF ADP.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. But now you wouldn't even trade Hurts, for Herbert straight up. Last year you could have put Hurts and a first, and the Herbert owner would have gone, no, thank you, I need more than that. And it's just
potentially,
I love it.
It is insane. There's a guy that I wanted to talk about that has also made a massive jump, and that's Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields is kind of where Jalen Hurts was last year. The only difference is the Bears aren't as secure going into the 2024 draft. But I think that could change now that they've got the 101. Because if you didn't hear, the Texans won on the last play of the game, or I think it was very close on a 4th and 20, ended up scoring a touchdown and then went for 2 and won the game. And Lovie Smith's two-finger salute basically to the Texans, knowing that he was going to get fired, dropping them out of the first overall pick in the NFL draft. Now that falls down to Justin Fields or down to Chicago. I know that there's a lot of talk at the moment around whether the Bears are actually going to use that on a quarterback. I don't see any reason why. Fields has shown enough that he can somehow make that offense look bearable to watch. I know that it wasn't much through the air, but he showed that he can throw the ball well. He runs the ball incredibly well. And we've got to remember his number one target that everyone was pumping up at the start of the season, Darnell Mooney, was placed on IR. They traded, which is an awful trade looking back, but they traded the 32nd overall pick, or 33rd overall pick, sorry, for Chase Claypool, who basically hasn't done anything since he got there. Quinnipiac St. Brown, who was cut by the Packers last season, or in the off season, ended up being one of their top wide receivers. And another guy, Dante Pettis, who I don't know whether you remember, Paul, but back when I first started playing Dynasty, he was a name that was being touted as maybe a breakout candidate for 49ers. So when you put all that together and you think Justin Fields now has a team that has the 101 that is most likely going to get traded for multiple picks, either this year or next year, as well as having 100 million in cap space, which is an incredible amount. And they can go out and get some of these wide receivers. I mean, the wide receiver free agency isn't brilliant, but I think we just need to remember that this team is in the middle of a rebuild. They're not starting it, and that's probably not. But that's why I don't think they're going to use the 101 on the QB.
Yeah, so I kind of look at this in the same way that we looked at Jalen Hurts in a sense. You know, they gave him weapons, and it changed everything for him. And I kind of feel if the Bears did the same thing and got a big-bodied, solid wide receiver one, I think that could be a great start for Justin Fields in the sense of what he can do throwing the ball. I'm not saying he's bad at throwing the ball, but I think he needed that safety net of somebody. You've seen it for years with Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers. They need that player that they can rely on, and I don't think he's got that yet. And I don't think he's got a connection with a player there that is his get out of jail. Maybe you could sort of make an argument that it was Cole Kmet towards the latter half of the season. He seemed to be searching for him a lot more than what he did, but I still think he needs that out and out wide receiver that is going to get him out of trouble a lot of the time. His legs can only do it so much. So I'm excited to see what the Bears do. Like you said, they've got that 100 mil cap space, and they've got the 101. I think they've got 8 other picks from what I read in the draft as well. So they could really be a team, that I'm excited to see what they do with that, with all of them, and what they can do to help Justin Fields. He's a big mover for me this year. He's a big mover. He's probably creeping into that top 12, maybe even just under the 10 mark in dynasty rankings for me. So I'm excited to see what Justin Fields brings next year and how
do you think he's a bit of a buy now then, Paul? So
yeah, but I think you're going to struggle because obviously, looking at that, you're going, he has finished the season as the QB5. He's finished as a QB5 points per game. I do think people are going to look at that and sort of go, he's finished as QB5 this season. I'm not going to sell him for what you want to pay, So I think you may struggle. I think maybe wait closer to the draft and see what sort of rumors are knocking about. If there's rumor that the Bears are going to take a QB or anything like that, I think that's when I'd maybe be looking to buy cheap and sort of, pray that they don't take a QB, and then you could have bought him cheap and go from there,
I think if they're going to try and play that game overall, we might take a QB. I think the trade's going to come maybe a week or two in advance of the draft, like the San Francisco trade up. I think that's kind of a similar situation to what the Bears will do, but in the
try and
reverse,
hike the price a bit more, innit?
Exactly, yeah, before the draft, because then once you get to the draft, they've got a little bit less leverage because they don't actually want to take one at that point. So with Justin Fields, some interesting things when I looked at his stats for the season. He threw over 200 yards just twice in the entire season, just twice. And then when you look at his receivers in total, that's all his tight ends, his running backs, his wide receivers, everyone. The person with the most yards was Cole Kmet with 544. That's less than 600 yards for his leading wide receiver. Cole Kmet also had the most receptions of 50 over the 17-game span that he played. Darnell Mooney, if you could say that he was on pace, and he was on pace for a lot more. I mean, he's got 493 yards, and he was out. He only played what would essentially be 11 games. So it's definitely something to consider with Fields that he didn't put up massive numbers in the air. But I think that's where you can maybe not play on it when you're trying to trade with someone, because I think people are going to look at his season finish and think that's it, he's QB5. I think that's where the jump is going to come from. And I do think that Fields is a buy if you can get him for mid to early first. That's probably something I'm doing. I mean, let's ignore that. I'm doing it for an early first, so if you can get it for a mid, brilliant. But I'd probably trade the 103 for him. 102, 101, I'd have to consider it. But without knowing the class too well, I'm not going to advise getting rid of the 101, 102 for Fields right now. Paul, is there anyone else that you wanted to talk about from the top 12?
So I'll tell you what, I'll stick to people that are rising up my rankings, and I will talk about the big Trevor Lawrence at the bottom there, and he just seems to grow every game I watch. He just seems to be growing more and more in confidence, and I think, I don't know if that's just him personally or whether the coaching staff are starting to click and everything's starting to get in the right place. But, I think at the start of the season, the Jags had a bit of bad blood about them and stuff like this from what happened the season before. And I think they weren't in the right place. And the fact that they've snuck into the playoffs as well, I think that's all credit to Trevor Lawrence. And to me, he was somebody that was like the back end of a QB1 for me anyway, but I think I'm watching him play, and he's definitely stepping up for me now, and believe it or not, there's some big names that are falling, and we'll speak about one of them in a minute, but Trevor Lawrence is somebody I'd like to get your opinion on, and see where you're sat with Trevor Lawrence at the moment, dynasty wise. Are you as high as I am, or?
I'm a little bit higher. I need to redo my rankings at this point, but I can see him around the QB10, QB9 spot. I think that again he can take a jump. He only threw for 25 touchdowns this season, so that's not a lot when it comes to a quarterback. You kind of expect a 35-ish average for a top 12 QB. In fantasy, it seems like we weren't as much throwing touchdowns. And he didn't run the ball as far as I kind of expected. He had just under 300 yards on 60 attempts, which I expect more than that from a quarterback. So I'm not saying that he was disappointing in any way whatsoever, because he was fantastic. He managed to jump up a lot, but he was the quarterback that a lot of people were expecting to make that jump, I suppose, or make a bit more of a jump. So one thing I wanted to ask you, Paul, and I know that you're a big Trevor Lawrence fan, so I have no doubt that you know these answers, but do you know how many plus 300 games he had in the air? Or should we do this instead of that?
I've got how many yards he threw. and how many air yards he's got, but I haven't got how many 300-yard games he's got. So you've got me with that one. You got me with that one. I know he threw for 4,113 yards.
He did. Let's rephrase the question. Do you think he had more, less, or equal to Jalen Hurts' 300-yard games, which was 4?
Less.
You're wrong. It's equal. He had 4 games this year with over 300 yards.
It's going to be like a trick question. You go, he's had no 300-yard games.
No, he's had 4. And I think the other interesting thing is he had 10 top 12 QB weeks. 10. That is over half of the season. And I think that's what's surprising. He was surprisingly consistent throughout the majority of the season. He did have a few bad games. It was QB 32 in week 17, QB 30 against Philly when they were a massively good defense in week 4. There was a couple of lower than QB 2 weeks, but the rest of it was pretty steady all the way through the season. So I think that's something as well that a lot of people miss or kind of lay on or put on the lowdown is how steady he was throughout the season, and therefore how consistent he can be in the future.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at some of the stats going in front of me now. He was in passing attempts, he was 7th overall. In deep ball attempts, he was 9th. In red zone attempts, he was 8th. Passing yards, he was 9th. Air yards, he was 10th. And you're just looking at them, and they all seem to be like it's all around that 7, 8, 9 mark. He's very consistent, and he's up there. He's up there, and I suppose what separates him from the guys ahead of him is possibly that rushing side of the ball. Don't get me wrong, I know Pat Mahomes doesn't actually rush the ball that much, but if he's going to throw, so Trevor Lawrence was 4,100. I think Pat Mahomes threw 5,400 yards or something. And you know what I mean? That's what separates Pat Mahomes. But a lot of the other QBs that you'll see in this top tier or even the QB ones, a lot of them have that rushing upside. And I think Trevor Lawrence is somebody that is there, and he doesn't have that rushing upside. He just throws the ball, and he just throws it so well that he doesn't need to rush, And it's interesting for Trevor Lawrence. I'm quite interested. I'm quite excited to see where he goes. I'm excited to see that Jags team next year, to be honest. I will say that.
Yeah, it'll be quite interesting to figure out what that Jags team does, and Christian Kirk, which is a good surprise that I'm sure we'll speak about in 2 weeks' time. But it's quite an interesting kind of situation to be in, isn't it, for Trevor Lawrence? And he's got Doug Peterson that has brought him along in the first season. So you mentioned, Paul, that there was another name that you wanted to talk about, but what was that? Someone on in the top 12, or was that someone else?
Yeah, so that's somebody for me. So I've spoke about how Jalen Hurts has risen, and Justin Fields has risen, and Trevor Lawrence rise. They've all risen. But to me, somebody that's really fallen for me, and it's probably quite difficult to say, but Kyler Murray's really fallen for me. He's still inside the top 12, so he's still a QB1 and stuff, but I've got a lot of worries there. The injury, and then with the sacking of Cliff Kingsbury, and then they've got rid of the general manager and stuff like this, and I'm just everything. I may be looking at the Cardinals a bit different as I'm a Cards fan, but everything worries me, and there's rumor that he may not be back till sort of like halfway through the season next year, and all of a sudden you go, what sort of connection is he going to have with this new head coach? He's not going to play pre-seasons. He's not going to play any games. Where is he going to be? What position is he in and stuff like this? And I know Kyler Murray is a future asset in Dynasty is phenomenal, but actually, if you look at him over the next 2 years, me and you spoke about this with with Kyle Pitts and in the one that we did in the off season and QB situations and managers and everything like this. And I'm kind of getting that vibe with Kyler Murray now. He comes back week 10 next year. He's got a new head coach. He's got a new coaching staff. He's never played under them. He's had no preseasons. He's had no training camps. He's had nothing like that. He's not done any of this. And then all of a sudden, they're trying to figure out each other. They're trying to figure out how each other works, the plays that they call and everything like this. And I just worry that next year is going to be a bit of a write-off for him. And before we even see any value back of Kyler Murray, I think we're going to be talking 2024, and then all of a sudden, if you're a contender, do you want that person on your team till 2024? You're talking a 2024 championship before he even pays back what you're going to pay for him and stuff like that. And to me, I won't be drafting much Kyler Murray this year. I won't be doing it. I promise you.
Many people will. I don't think many people will. You took the words out of my mouth. I was sat there thinking, I really want to get in the he's not going to be a dynasty, or he's going to be a dynasty asset, but he's not going to increase in value until the 2024 season, or at least at the end of the 2023 season. And that's what you took straight out of my mouth. I have nothing to add because I completely agree with everything else that you mentioned. But Paul, let's move on to the next segment, as we're 40 odd minutes into it already. Thinking outside the QB1 box. So we've spoken about the top 12. I put a couple of names on here, Paul, that I wanted to speak about, and you've put in so many notes, but I don't think we're going to get to them all. So let's start off with the first one, Justin Herbert. You mentioned that when we had you on in the off season, we spoke about the difficult conversations that fantasy people need to have with themselves. One of them was around Justin Herbert. I know that I caught some flack on Twitter around why are we even having this conversation? Justin Herbert, you're just throwing it out there kind of thing. And I'm not victory lapping because it was an awful injury.
You're totally victory lapping.
I'm not, because it's an injury. It's an injury. You would never victory lap over an injury, but it's something that everyone needs to always have in their heads, that these things can happen. And he ended up season finish of 12 points per game, 17th overall, 17th in QB rankings. But in August DLF ADP, he was QB1 overall. And this is what I was trying to say at the time. He was the most obvious sell in the world. Even if he put up a QB1 season this year, he would, as in the QB1 overall, he wouldn't have returned the value of that draft pick. It would have just stayed the same. Maybe it would have increased a little tiny bit, but I think that it still would have stayed where it was. Whereas now we're viewing him completely differently, and there was a lot more risk to the gain that you would have got if he put up a QB1 season. And that's what the whole difficult conversations pod was about. Flipping over to this season, where we are sat right now, Paul, Herbert has had a tough season. He was knocked out of a few games. He didn't play the full season. He also had that rib injury that ended up costing him basically his elite play for a good portion of the season. He didn't have his top two wide receivers for a good portion of the season as well. They were in and out of the lineup. So a massively tough season for Justin Herbert. But coming into next season, do we kind of look at the bye situation right now? How far do you think it's fallen?
Yeah, so that's what I put in the notes. I was like, has Herbert completely flipped? Like you just said, he was definitely a sell candidate going into the season, and I don't think many people could sell him because what they wanted to sell him for, nobody wanted to pay to buy and stuff like that. But I genuinely think he has become a buy candidate now. He's definitely gone onto that buy candidate, and to me, he's. I suppose I'm saying all of this quite a lot. Like, oh yeah, he's still a QB1, and I'm running out of QB1 spaces to put all these players that I'm saying are QB1s, you know. But he is a you know, he is still a QB1, and the talent is still there. I'd like I said, man, I'd definitely be looking to see what I could get for her, like what where the lay land, what's the word, the land lays, and see what I could, you know. I'm definitely thinking of putting some feelers out there, and you know, there's a couple of places I've got the 101. If somebody's willing to sell Herbert for the 101, I'd definitely be willing to have that sort of conversation. You know what I mean?
I don't think he's dropped to the bottom of the top 12 QBs. I still think that he's around where you had Lamar, Kyler last year, where he is in that QB 5 to 6 range. But I think
I'm a bit lower than that.
Lower than that. Yeah,
I think I'm somewhere around the 8 mark. I think he may be pushed down to 7, 8, but yeah, we're about similar. But no, I definitely think he is a buy candidate this year for sure.
So, Paul, do you have anyone else outside the top 12 QBs that you wanted to talk about here?
So there's not really a specific person that I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about a scenario more than anything. And I was saying this to you before we came on. So I know I'm a bit keen, but I've already been involved in a mock draft because you know the people I'm friends with are just crazy. Just they want to get drafts going straight away. You know, we hadn't finished the season and they're drafting. But one thing that really stood out for me, and because we're talking about QBs, is actually like the value of QBs is there for about 15, 16 QBs. And then it just disappears. And I don't know if that's the uncertainty. Like you said, there could be like 17 teams that need a QB. I don't know if it's that's playing a part. I don't know if actually it's so fresh that we're like, I don't want him, I don't want him, I don't want him. But you know, I think I've seen like 16 QBs go within the first 3 rounds. And over the next like 5 rounds, I think only 2 or 3 QBs went. We're in a super flex draft. You know what I mean? That is unheard of. You know, it was QB's QB values in super flex drafts is unreal, and it just really worries me on what it's going to be like this year for QBs, and also throw caution to the wind to anyone that is going to be drafting a starter before sort of March time, before we start getting a lot of talk of the draft and who's doing what and where people are going and stuff like that. Really, like, I know everyone's eager to get into these startup drafts, but I don't think I want to get into one at the moment, because especially a super flex, I'd really worry about what I'd be doing at QB. And if I don't get the right QBs, I'd feel a bit lost. Like, you know what I mean? It's
completely. I completely agree. I mean, when we looked at last year, I know we're talking at the end of the off season for a lot of this pod, but if you go back to around draft time, you didn't really have. You had the drop off around QB 19 or 20 last year, sorry. You still had that drop off, but there were still more QBs that were a bit more sure about. I know some have surprised us, some haven't, but I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, because I am not overly keen on doing a starter right now because of that conversation. If you have 2 QB spots that you want to fill, are you really wanting to take 3 or 4 shots on QBs that you don't really know what's going to happen next season? Let's think Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. I know these are some of the older guys, but you've got guys like Derek Carr. You don't know where he's going to be next year. You think that he's going to have a job, but you don't really know. You've got Daniel Jones, same thing. I think that's something to really think about, and we need to have that discussion a little bit more than what's currently going on. on the flip side, you could also think that those QB2s and high-end QB3s are also great values right now. And if you do a starter, in 6 months' time, you could be looking at a stacked roster with 4 or 5 starters because you picked them up in rounds. What are you saying, Paul? Around 5 to 10, and you picked up that many QBs. It's quite interesting.
So I'm just looking at this and like round 6, you had Kenny Pickett, Jared Goff. Round 7, Derek Carr, Mac Jones. Round 8, Daniel Jones, Matt Stafford. Jordan Love, 2 picks before Aaron Rodgers.
It's interesting.
Round 9, Ryan Tannehill and Jimmy G. Round 11, Tom Brady, Desmond Ridder. Round 13 was Mike White, Brock Purdy, and Baker Mayfield. But to me, this just screams uncertainty, and people are just, they don't. They're like, oh, I don't know who to take, and I kind of feel like some of these teams were put in a position where they were like, oh, I've got 2 QBs, I need a third, or who do I take? And somebody's taken Brock Purdy as QB 30 off the board, like, you know what I mean? Well,
I think it was a type of thing. I personally wouldn't go for Brock Purdy in that situation, but as a QB3, but you're going to get these value spikes because of these situations. It's quite a interesting thing to think about, isn't it?
If you know what I mean, if the 49ers have injuries and stuff like that, again, Brock Purdy could hold a value and you can flip that value and stuff like that. But as your QB3 in a team,
it's not something
I wouldn't want it. If I'm doing a startup, I don't want Brock Purdy as my QB3. I don't want Mike White as my QB3. I don't want Baker Mayfield as my QB3. I don't want Desmond Ridder as my QB3. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to point out that actually looking forward into the next season, the QB room is just gonna break people's hearts this year. If I'm honest,
it is until free agency happens and potentially even the draft. I think there's going to be a lot of open questions.
Yeah, and I think as a community, I'm a sucker for it myself, mate, and you probably are as well, Liam. We do this every year. We say we're not going to, we're going to cut leagues, and then we end up cutting down some of the leagues and stuff like this that we've been in a couple of years, and then before you know it, you've got 4 drafting, and people convince you to do others and stuff like this, and we all get in these startups, and it's just I feel like people are going to go make educated guess, and the QB room is going to break hearts this year. It really is. So my advice, we'll turn this see, look at this, what a segment. We're going to turn this into a dynasty tip. My advice is caution to the wind when drafting QBs.
Caution to the wind when drafting QBs. That's an interesting take. What transition, you little showman, you. Before we go, Paul, I'm going to give a bit of a riddle to the listeners. It's QB related. I thought it was quite interesting. So, which 2 quarterbacks played only 1 game yet finished as a QB1 in points per game when you include all the weeks in the season? That's 1 to 18. Paul, don't answer. You can text me your answer if you want after the show. But there are 2 quarterbacks. There are 2.
Which 2 quarterbacks played only 1 game?
Correct.
Yet finished as a QB1 in points per game if all weeks were included.
Yeah.
Okay.
Text me your answer. So one more time, listeners.
I've just checked the show sheet. I just checked the show sheet to see if the answer was on there, and I'm really annoyed that it's not.
It isn't. I'm not going to put that on there for you. But which 2 quarterbacks played only 1 game and yet finished as a QB1 in points per game? If all weeks were included, so that's weeks 1 to 18 in the season. Paul, is there anything you wanted to plug before we get out of here?
Go and give Wildcard Rewind a like, a follow, everything like that. Come check us out on a Monday night. We normally record our show in between 8 and 9. and then it's normally out on it's out on stream and what's the word I'm looking for, on your podcast, where you can get your podcasts on about 9:30 at night. So come check me, Hannah, and Mags out. We have a great time, and they bully me, but there we go.
It is a great show, guys. So if you are looking for a bit more fantasy football or football in general action, go over to the app football. What is it at? Fantasy Rewind?
At Wildcard Rewind.
At Wildcard Rewind. And you can find all of Paul's work at Paul_Picken on Twitter. But until next time, guys. Oh, one thing before we go. This is the only week I can plug it. So I run playoff leagues every year. Check out my pinned tweet at the FSA Tweets on Twitter. There's paid leagues, so that's a £20 buy-in or $20 buy-in. And there's also free leagues where it's fantasy football, but for the playoffs, if you're not finished scoring those fantasy football points, hit me up on Twitter, join those leagues. And until next time, guys, make sure to throw caution to the wind when drafting QBs. See you later.